O morena koutou, ko Francois, Barton, tiko ingoa. We're just waiting for those numbers to click through. So hopefully those that are coming on board are now, and others will continue to drop through. As always, lovely to be able to virtually meet as a small group on issues that we care about. It's my great pleasure today to have friend and colleague Selena Armstrong, CEO of ShopCare. Selena, good morning.
Thank you. Kia ora. Kia ora koutou katoa, everybody.
Well, look, and obviously everyone knows why we're here, Selena. It's probably for us to look at collecting together and trying to make some sense of this challenge we've got. And if I look back on my time working in health and safety, I'd say mental well-being about 8 years ago and violence and aggressive behaviour have sort of been the two real substantive shifts in terms of when I say new, sort of different types of health and safety at work risks coming onto our radar, and so it's a really great opportunity, I think, today, maybe rather than this as a polished masterclass in violence and aggressive behaviour, you and I to compare some notes on what we're both seeing and share that with the people on the call. And for you on the call to be able to hear from you around questions you've got and any feedback for both Selena and I on the way through. But I obviously, I think off the back of this, and I think we'll hear from you later, Selena, you've got some work afoot.
Yep.
And so the opportunity to sort of see what that looks like going forward and for others to lean in. So I'm really grateful you were up for joining me. It's certainly going to be a richer conversation for it. And really grateful that people could join us today. We've actually got, so for those on the call, what we're going to do is we're going to throw up a quick poll now, just to sort of take a bit of a pulse check on where you're at regarding how violence and aggressive, our ability to turn things into acronyms in health and safety is without parallel. But where you're at around VAB on your critical risk register, just to give us a sense of both where is it sitting as a priority and what's your confidence around control. So we'll let you have a look at that now. And what Selena and I will then do is we'll just rock into a broader conversation between the two of us around, I guess, how are we seeing the issues emerged across our various conversations. I'm really interested, Selena, to get a sense from you around how are you seeing organizations start to make some progress on this issue, both in terms of what I always like to think, understanding the risk in order to understand our work, like in that order, I think is quite useful. And then what we'll do is we'll finish with you sharing, I guess, some of the exciting work I know ShopCare's got on, and then we'll just open it up for questions on the way through. So for anybody that has questions, we'll just use the Q&A function. So here we are. Hopefully on your screen you can see here. So what do we see? So really it's either emerging or it's a critical risk for many. And I think we can see why you're on the call. While we've got people on the call, there's still a level of confidence question for all of us, I guess, how we get our arms wrapped around that. So that's I think used. Equally though, I think it's great to see we've got 7 out of that group going, hey, we've got a level of confidence we're across this. So my invitation and challenge to you on the call is, both in terms of your questions, if you've also got some ideas or some things you want to share, please throw it in the chat or throw it in the Q&A, and we'll put it into the group. So look, Selena, that's more than enough scene setting from me. Violence and aggressive, given ShopCare's focus is obviously right in your wheelhouse, especially. So what are you seeing? How's it turning up for you and your members?
Well, to start with, I mean, ShopCare's focused on the retail sector and its supply chain. And so we are looking at VAB from the perspective of frontline workers and their exposure. But essentially, the work that we're looking at and the work that we're doing, it really doesn't matter whether you're in retail or not. If you're a frontline worker, this is an issue that everybody is facing. And we got some interesting stats out of ACC recently. It's really hard to determine what violent and aggressive behaviour is occurring without a criminal element to it. And I'll get into that a little bit further. But we asked them to find some stats around assaults, so people that are making claims through workplace assaults. Now, that could be, it doesn't break it down into what the detail is around that, but we're assuming that's an assault from a customer. It may be assaults within organisations. And there's not a lot of claims coming forward. There's a few hundred a year in retail, which we'd expect a lot more. So people are probably don't think they even can put an ACC claim in, or they're not even reporting what's going on. But what was really interesting when we looked at those stats was that manufacturing was a close second to retail in terms of ACC assault claims. Now, why is that the case, right? That's worth digging into, I think. So what we're seeing is a level of violence and aggression happening between customers and workers, between customers. I mean, it's all over. It's, truck drivers pulling into the back of warehouses and unloading, and they're coming across violent and aggressive behaviour. It's really something that's occurring in any interaction where you have with another person. So we talk about frontline workers because they're generally bearing the brunt of it, but this is pervasive through every sector in any interaction you have with another human being where there is just a lack of respect. And I think when you look at the stats, majority of the focus has been on retail crime and loss reduction. That's where we've led our interventions have been focused on how do we reduce stock losses. But we know that the violent and aggressive behaviour that's happening in stores, specifically in retail, doesn't always have a criminal element to it. It may just be a frustration that peak customers have. I mean, we've looked into some of the drivers of VAB in the retail sector, and they tend to be, drug and alcohol addiction issues. It's a lack of respect for workers, this element that we've had in retail for so long where the customer is always right, has given some people a sense of entitlement. It's often women or minority workers that are in retail, so they're often the target of a lot of aggression. I think that the reality is we're in a really tough economy. So financial hardship is something that a lot of people are experiencing, and this may lead to a sense of frustration. And it doesn't mean they're coming in to steal at all. They just, people are really struggling out there. And so there's a whole range of issues that drive violence and aggression in retail. There's no silver bullet. This thing is hard to manage. There's going to be a multitude of things that we're going to need to do, interventions that we're going to undertake to make a difference in this. But we don't think that it's not achievable. I think there'll always be a criminal element, and we can make our stores hard targets, so those that are unlikely, make it near on impossible for people to commit retail crimes. If you think about the banking industry, they've done this really, really well. They've almost designed out armed robbery. Not completely, but you just don't hear or see of it occurring anymore, and that's because of the way they've designed banks. So I feel like if we can design out armed robbery, we can design out violent and aggressive behaviour as well. ShopCare's remit is more around workplace safety. There's a lot of groups out there that are looking at retail crime and loss prevention, and we're in those. The Retail Safety Leaders Group, we sit on that group with a range of retailers. They're looking at great interventions. They work with the New Zealand Police and the Retail Investigation Crime Unit, and they collaborate really effectively in that space. We've got the Ministerial Advisory Group that is looking at policy around how we can improve outcomes, and Retail NZ have got some working groups focused on this space as well. But we don't have anybody looking specifically at how do we reduce acts of violence and aggression on our frontline workers when there is actually no criminal intent there. It's a separate piece. And while we have been pushing forward and collecting data and putting hard targets in stores and creating interventions around retail crime, there's this piece here that we have forgotten about. And it's the everyday appalling interactions that frontline workers are having with customers. And it's spiked since COVID, we know that. And I don't know the reason why. I suspect, we had a lot of rules around ourselves at that time. Everyone's going to come through COVID in a different way. But since then, there just seems to be a general decline in civility in the way that we interact with each other. And that is really flowing through now to something that our frontline workers are dealing with every day. It is a critical risk because violent and aggressive behaviour incidents could be life-threatening and life-altering if they're left to escalate. So this is something that we are going to have to manage, whether we like it or not, because the retail industry won't survive if we can't sort this out. No one will want to be a retail worker. I know I certainly don't want my kids going in to the front line when they're school ready. It's not necessarily a safe place to be. And if we can't make retail environments or retail precincts feel safe and secure to visit, then customers just won't turn up. So we have to fix this issue for the survival of the industry, as much as for the reality of the frontline workers and what they're facing every day.
I think what fascinates me in that I think really that chimes, I think, with what I'm seeing. We pulled together, and you and Jerry Lynch from ShopCare joined that conversation. Was it earlier this year? We had about 6 or 7 senior leaders and purposefully selected across the forum from some non-retail and retail spaces. And what was around tackling and understanding the violence and aggression. What really struck me was this is turning up in place, to your point, turning up not just in places where we have customer interactions. I don't think they'll at all mind me mentioning the organisations. We had Brendan Main from Chief Operating Officer from NZ Post, and they have drivers and courier vans and trucks driving around the country, and in essence they're mobile department stores. And the range of different sort of environments, both walking up to people's front doors and in terms of them as moving targets. Auckland Council was there, and the range of sort of situations across, things like libraries and swimming pools. So I think this idea of how these issues or risks are turning up really across both site-specific contexts, like some sort of retail or customer interface. But I don't know if you saw over I saw a LinkedIn post, Dave Tilton from Parallax's temporary traffic management guru, and he was saying there was a Stuff article where basically, I'm going to say it out here, there's been sort of political permissioning to basically say anybody that works in temporary traffic management seems to be worthy of copping a serve from someone. And we're in situations where we've had all sorts of increased reports of abusive and aggressive behaviour to road workers that are actually allowing really important asset management to go on. So what's your take, given that this isn't just a retail environment, it actually sits where basically we've got people doing work and the public is remotely involved. What's your sense about how well that's understood both by senior teams, boards, and ultimately across government in terms of where we might be able to get our collective hands around it, Selena?
Look, I think this has been something that organisations have largely been grappling with in isolation for some time. But what we're seeing now is a real call to action. So what organisations are, I think what's happened actually is that people are feeling that this behaviour or the VAB is a little bit out of their control. It's a bit of a societal issue. And so it's not something any one organisation can fix in isolation. We need to come together. And we've had this workshop that we had with you, with those senior leaders. We had a workshop a couple of weeks ago with a range of safety and industry advocates really that are focused on this issue because it's something that they're working with every day, that understand that we need to be able to work collaboratively to actually have an impact. What I would like to see happen is a national harm prevention strategy or a national harm prevention roadmap focused on violent and aggressive behaviour without criminal intent, so without focusing on retail crime, because that's the police, right? I mean, in a way, the response toolkit you have at the point where a crime is being committed becomes, I'm not saying easy, but becomes clearer, right? That's kind of what you're meaning? Yeah, we've got really great organisations out there like Aura who have nearly 80% of the retailers in the country as customers. They track the data. We've got facial recognition technology that's going to be feeding into that soon. Retail crime, there's a huge amount of investment in resolving that. So we need that to continue to happen because a lot of the drivers of VAB is criminal, but there's this element that isn't. It's actually how we treat each other, the incivility, the lack of respect that we have for just our common human being. And so there are lots of ways that we can tackle this issue, but we can't do anything in isolation, and we need to be having a long-term roadmap around how we do that. And I'll be talking a little bit more about that later. But what I love is this movement, this groundswell of movement from advocates who want to lean in, who want to collaborate, and who want to address this issue because they see the harm every day in their work environments. And we've been discussing looking at a campaign, looking at a customer-facing campaign. We had the SDA, which is a union of frontline workers in Australia, speak to us around their No One Deserves a Serve campaign, which has been quite effective. It's been running since 2017. So we could learn from them about what worked really well and what would they do differently. One of the things that came out of that workshop in particular was a national survey. So we actually have no data around from frontline workers. We don't have the worker voice involved in this at all. And it's really important that we get a national picture of what frontline workers are experiencing, and not just in retail. We want to engage everybody in this national survey so we can get a picture from frontline workers about their exposure to this risk and their experience and their thoughts. What do they see that's really effective? Because in order to inform any work that we do going forward, we really do need a better picture about what the state of the nation is. So we'll be looking at collaborating with a range of organisations and running that national survey. We've had great support already. So one of the calls I'd like to put out on this webinar is we'd like you to get on board. It'll be completely anonymised. We will want to understand what sector that worker is in, but that's it. No, we won't want to know what organisation they're in or anything like that. But, if you think about the AMBOs and the police and the firefighters, we want their voice included in all of this, right across every government agency, as well as retail, as well as manufacturing, construction.
They are workers too, right?
They are workers too, and they're experiencing this just as much as anybody else.
I think it's really neat that I'm really grateful from a forum perspective, because I think I indicated with the emergence of mental well-being about 6, 7, 8 years ago as sort of a new type of risk and this aggressive behaviour risk in the last year or three. From a forum perspective, it's been really apparent, but the capacity of how to given the forum's audience sort of sits at senior leaders across a whole range of contexts, been able to have the capacity to get our arms around it's been a challenge. And so to have you and your organisation, Selena, take a run on it, I think is just great. And the idea of how we can get them behind and bring what we can to the table, because again, you won't be doing it all. It's around how do you provide that rallying point. But so I'm really glad that we've got that, and I'm keen to learn more around actually, and I know you've got some slides maybe around what that broader program of work or what you'd like that roadmap to look like. But if we can just come back to the organizations that are here today and putting this into an enterprise context, so step out of the national context and societal context into an enterprise context. One of my reflections with mental health was when it first popped onto the agenda, and to be honest, I still think we've got a little bit of this now. It's kind of like, mental health, we've got to do stuff. And so the answer is kind of throwing lots of stuff at a wall and hoping some of it sticks. And where I've seen organizations start to make progress has been whether it's using the forum sense-making framework, whether it's leaning into some of the ISO work or some of the Australian, making sense of what are the risks and opportunities around mental health, therefore what's the nature of our risk control, whether that's primary, secondary or tertiary. What are you seeing at an enterprise level organizations both struggle with and make progress on around understanding the VAB risk and then being able to control it?
Well, I think organizations understand the risk. But not necessarily what the right controls are. I think if you take primary, secondary, and tertiary, for example, just to explain it in the easiest way, a primary control is something that you do before anything happens, to focus on prevention, right? And that might be hardening up your environment, making, so fog cannons and all the rest of it, making it a difficult target. We've also got primary interventions that we're looking at. In particular, there is an ambassador program, which I absolutely love it. We discovered this being run out at the Manurewa Business Association. Neil and his team were just doing this amazing job with these ambassadors who were like a little retail concierge in a sense. They knew they were locals. They knew the people that were in that environment by name. They built relationships with all the retailers. They built the relationship with the regular people, some of the streeties. They actually got trained in de-escalation techniques, but also being able to identify hazards in the community. And they work in tandem, they work in pairs, and they go out and they are that person that you go to if you're having an issue in the retail precinct. And they're the ones that then go and address, they might be seeing somebody drinking too heavily in the environment, which could end up in a violent or aggressive incident. And they've been driving them home. I mean, it was quite phenomenal what we witnessed. And when I spoke to Neil about the impact that these ambassadors were having, he said that it has had a huge impact on driving down incidents occurring, because they're able to offer this preventative role, really, that operates every day, gets to know people, and just tones down the environment. And I just thought that was fantastic. So we're looking at.
So is that like a site-based collectively resourced? So is like in a shopping mall or sort of that.
It is. So it's the retail precinct itself. So the business association runs it. There are other associations running ambassador programs, but there was something special about what Neil was doing, and that was building the relationships with the local community and those that interacted on a regular basis in there, and really being very much a supportive role, not a security as such. They were quite different. So it's looking at how do we work in a precinct addressing issues of violent and aggressive behaviour before they ever enter stores. Now, that's real prevention. That's real primary stuff. And I'm really excited about the opportunity that presents in lots of different precincts around the country. I think if we can nail something like that, we could roll it out nationally. At a reasonably low expense. Retailers can all participate in funding it. It's not. I don't think it's a huge amount of money to get across the line, and local councils support it. Auckland Council provides so much money for each of these precincts through rates, so you can have it funded. But I think where people are focusing is training, which is really important as well. So just a bit of a plug for ShopCare and our training. We've got 4 pieces of online de-escalation training, which are excellent. But what I really love as well is, apart from the fact that they're free to anybody, is we've wrapped that up with some training through Umbrella, who are looking at how we manage post-incidents. So how do you support your team? How do you support yourself? And if this is something that you're dealing with on an everyday basis, how do you support your mental health in the long term? So that's tertiary. That's after the incidents happen. How do we wrap around our people? EAP is great. It's just one thing. We need to be reporting, and we need to be learning from every incident. So when we've got an incident, we don't just accept that that's just the norm.
Right.
Look at what happened. What could we have done differently?
So if we bring a health and safety sort of critical risk bow tie piece, we're on the right side we're on the recovery side of the incident. So we've had the top event. Yeah. How do we, from a safe failure perspective, how do we when these things happen rather than if, how do we mitigate or manage the impact so that we're not constantly.
It's taking back some control from something that feels like it's very much out of our control. There are things that we can do, and we can learn from these incidences. We should be figuring out, I know with Aura data, you can see that at certain times of the week, you're more likely to have an incident of retail crime. So it's a bit moving into the retail crime space. But through their data, can we see, is there a time of the week or days where we see more aggression happening? And if so, should we be putting more security, trained security on the door during those peak hours of where we're seeing those fluxes?
So again, that's starting to. So if we think, I'm really interested, again, questions or comments from the group. But what I'm liking about this this idea of almost that risk control framework you're talking about around the tertiary, secondary, and primary controls is it plugs into a risk language that I think will be hopefully increasingly familiar for good executives and good boards. But it also kind of lets you go, rather than that throwing stuff at a wall and we're doing lots of stuff to be able to go down, are we getting our balance for controls appropriately spread? So when you talk about training, I often also hear people talking about de-escalation training or microaggression training, whereas what you were talking about was almost like how do we sort of wrest some control back when. So if we're thinking from a primary, secondary, and tertiary level, what types of training could an organization expect to see as useful to invest in?
Well, I think I look at things like de-escalation training as both a primary and a secondary intervention, because you do the training beforehand and then you've got the skills in the moment. So the secondary is, what do I do in the moment when it's happening? So I think it crosses both of those things. But if we're looking at tertiary interventions, training that focuses on how do I hate using the term build my resilience. I really hate it, because it feels like we're saying, well, you've just got to harden up, and that's not okay. That is absolutely not okay. But we know that these incidences are occurring. So what can we do to help staff not take that on? And it's focused on, I think, on things like understanding what your body does in these instances. So fight or flight, how do I manage myself after I've been involved in something like this? Taking a 5-minute break is just probably not enough. You need to take stock. You need to take some power back. What has gone on in that moment? How could I have managed it better? How do I not take that home with me at the end of the day? And how do I hold it lightly and not carry it with me? Because if we can hold this stuff lightly and don't take these issues personally, the impact on our long-term mental health won't be as significant. But it's really hard to do, and you have to understand how your body reacts. It's quite a personal thing, but building that skill set is powerful for so many different things in life. And
again, what I think the value of this risk framework that you're talking about, though, is also saying if that's all you're doing,
it's not enough.
You've got so the ability from dare I say it, from a due diligence or just an effective leadership perspective is we need to be, as Hilary Bennett would often say, with our sense-making framework, are we covering all the bases? Are we playing the full field? And so what you're saying is actually this risk framework can be a really useful way of giving executives and boards a level of confidence around, well, where are we at across those sort of 3 appropriate levels of control? So what else?
What else? I'll tell you what else.
Yeah.
One of the most powerful things I have seen is when an organisation says, we are not going to tolerate this. It is not okay. The customer is not going to be all right. And if you do this, you'll be removed and you will not be allowed back in. And staff then see that the organisation has their back. They don't tolerate it. I've even heard of organisations shutting shop after an incident like this and say, we will close for the day if our staff are put through this sort of behaviour. If we come across the violent and aggressive behaviour in store, we will shut the shop for the rest of the day. Now that's incredibly powerful, because it's telling your people that you don't have to put up with this. It's not okay, and we will have zero tolerance for this behaviour. I think that's the most powerful thing organisations can do. But in reality, if you're not open, you're not making any money. So it's a tough call. I think it has to be tempered with all the other things that we can do. But from my perspective, any employer doing that, it's telling their people they put their welfare above anything else. And I don't think you can do anything more than that.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that sort of relates, so that would be that sits in the tertiary risk control area. I guess the incidents happen.
Because the incidents happened. That's right.
There's one of the things, for instance, call centres. Again, that won't be new to people on the call, I suspect. But I've been absolutely staggered at some of and look, I've been a frustrated white entitled middle class male on calls.
We've all been there. Francois.
But one of the things that struck me, I think it was one of our electricity outfits, talked about that they'd found their people were just actually the number of issues they were dealing with where it got really, really nasty. And we're talking death threats in some cases.
Yeah.
we're actually no longer even dealing with issues that the company had any responsibility or ability. These were wider societal issues. And so one of the things they had to do was actually they had to completely sort of relitigate the metrics of what good productive day at work means in terms of call rates, but the type of calls and been able to define with the worker input, at which point they are really fully mandated with the full support of the organization to say, I can no longer help you anymore. I'm terminating this call.
Yeah.
Rather than the performance metrics being really, well, that's then a negative because I didn't
Yeah.
resolve the customer's issues. So
Yeah.
that
I,
sits
I,
in that's a feedback lesson to a primary intervention, right?
yeah, but what I've heard directly from workers in call centres, and I won't name the organisation, but I did hear that they had a rule around, this particular woman was telling me they had a rule around you had to remind the person 3 times before you could hang up the call. And she said, most of the time I've already heard some stuff that is terrifying and really upsetting before I've had the 3-time warning.
Right.
She wanted to be empowered to hang up if
Yeah.
anybody spoke. And quite frankly, I think that that's a fair call. Nobody should have to sit there and listen to something 3 times before they're given the right of way to hang up,
So
right?
the
Disengage.
important piece there is for an organization to be able to reflect on, again, whether it's a call center or in some other environment, is actually our service standards are about quality and experience, but they also have a material impact on the work environment that can either exacerbate or help manage our people to get this right, right?
Yeah. And a lot of the time it's processes in the back end. I mean, I had a personal experience in a bank recently. Honestly, if I didn't do the job that I do, I really could have seen red mist. It was completely ridiculous. The process was set through government regs, so the poor worker had no ability to change it, but it was really over the top. And I did ask myself, how can we change and simplify the processes to ensure that our workers aren't facing aggression when the processes are set up to aggravate customers? And it's not the bank's fault because the government is setting the regs around this, but they're not understanding the impact on our frontline workers. So we're not even having those conversations at all.
Yeah. So we've got starting to get a couple of questions and an observation comes through. So I've seen those. We're going to come to them, team. I've just got a couple more ideas. So where does de-escalation training sit as a quality intervention? I'm assuming de-escalation's in a both, like you say, primary and secondary.
Yeah. I think it's 101. That's where you start, right? De-escalation, so that your workers build up the capability to understand how to tone things down with customers that, are getting increasingly aggressive. We have to be able to bring things back. I think it's very important, and far out, it's free on our website. So at the very bare minimum, anyone sitting in retail should have access to that training. Then you've got other things like Scott Taylor with his microaggression stuff. Now, this is a real primary intervention. He is training people how to identify those that have bad intent as they enter a store or in the store, so that okay, I've seen this person's displayed all the signals that I've learned. I'm going to go up and approach them and welcome them. Great customer service actually is a fantastic primary intervention, making sure people are aware that you're there. You're there to help them at any point that they've been seen. That often is a really big deterrent. And if we can recognize some of those micro expressions that somebody that's going to kick off might have, we can intervene before violence or aggression actually occurs. I love the work that he's doing. Yeah. I think every security guard should learn this stuff. I think store managers should be learning how to identify this stuff. Anybody can learn it. It's just about training, and it's about investing time in it.
Yeah. So we're talking about this tertiary, secondary, and primary sort of risk framework. I know you were indicating in Safe Work Australia have actually done some work around some sort of more formal official guidance in that space.
Yeah, we're going to steal it with pride, and
So
New Zealandize it.
what do we got? What to give it? Where's that? Where does that sit? What's the status of that idea?
Well, it's looking at trying to provide all the different ranges of interventions that you can apply in an organisation to reduce violent and aggressive behaviour in the workplace. We're in the retail sector, but I don't think it will be necessarily specific to retail. It's how do you monitor, manage, and reduce incidents of violence in your workplace? And the work that Safe Work Australia have done is fantastic. And we just want to take that, amend it to reflect New Zealand context, and then make sure we go out for peer review with our advisory group to ensure that they've got the opportunity to feedback as well. And then we'll share it with everybody, and hopefully
is there a timeline on what that's looking like?
No, we're hoping to do that before the end of the year, though. So we've got something. It'd be neat to be able to have something before the spike in Christmas shopping.
And so again, if I'm an organisation that's core businesses, selling things, moving things, dealing with the public, the idea of me being able to actually weave that into my risk management framework, my board due diligence conversations with the exec and the board around our risk. Here's best practice around what risk controls look like. Use it as an assurance document to be able to sort of go, we're flying in formation here, or we've identified some gaps we can resolve. I mean, that would be actually a really credible step forward.
And the thing is, what we want to know is what else is happening out there that has been really effective. I had a conversation with a woman in Northland, Millie Hanson, who was a branch manager at Kirikiri, and she was implementing their Te Ao Māori strategy. And she's had a huge reduction in incidents of VAB as a result of the way that they're now interacting with their customers. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening out there, and we just need to hear it. We need to find out, what is working really well for them, and is this something I could look at applying in my environment? The more we share, the more we learn, right? And there's so much happening.
I totally agree, and I think for me that there's so much to share. And if I go back to my mental well-being piece, my experience on that in the last 8 years, I had straight black hair before I got my hands around that issue, is if we don't have a framework to be able to post this practice, we end up sometimes getting a little bit either overwhelmed or confused over, do we do it all, or is it about balance? And I think what I like about this primary, secondary, tertiary framing is it lets us sort of take a risk-based prioritization structured approach, because we've only got a finite amount of resource and energy and time. And what struck me with that senior engagement, that sort of sense-making engagement you and I had with a number of senior leaders from the forum, was actually there was $30 to $40 million worth of annual investment these organisations were making across. I mean, these were large national organisations, but so there's an inordinate amount of investment going in a world when every dollar is tight. Doing that in a balanced frame, risk-based way, I think is really, really important. So I think a framework, an evidence-based, regulatory endorsed, workplace centric framework to allow organizations to prioritize, Selena. And I can sense already a structured webinar series where you and I elicit and we get people on to actually walk through what's going on.
Absolutely. But I think there's opportunity to collaborate more in that primary intervention space. So if you're an organization that is a retailer that has a number of retailers around you, working together to look at what primary interventions could we collaborate on together. It's not something we can solve independently. It really isn't. It needs a much broader engagement. And I think, engaging those other businesses that are working in the same districts as you to look at what can we do, whether that's increasing security cameras or sharing security officers. There's just a lot more that we can be doing. We don't have to be out on our own. I think a lot of people feel like this is out of their control, but there are things that we can do to make improvements.
And the flip side is we could then overcorrect as well and try and I think what I've really liked about the pragmatism you'll bring into this is what we're also not saying is it's business's job to fix all New Zealanders.
No.
Because that's boiling the ocean.
We had a great workshop last year. Actually, this was where we discovered the ambassador program, and we really looked at what we could be doing. We looked at a range of personas that generally are those that bring violent and aggressive behaviour into retail environments. And we looked at lots of different things that we could do, but they were most of them were in that social space, and it's just not where we play. What we have to be doing is improving workplace safety. That's the core thing. Now, the ambassador program was perfect because that was a primary intervention happening with a group of retailers in a precinct that had a direct outcome on the retailers that were working in there. We can't go to MSD and solve all the social problems. We can't, there's not a lot that retailers have influence over. But I think as a country, we can start to have those conversations about thinking twice before you lose your rag at, the woman behind the counter.
Nice. And I'm really, and I mean, it just strikes me how many organisations I go to. I'm in airports way too much, and I've just noticed in the last year going into the Corrie Lounge in Auckland, first world problems here, but there's now a banner before you go in saying, basically, don't be an asshole.
Yeah,
and I'm sort of thinking,
is it?
Oh, yeah. And yesterday there was a whole lot of delays at one of the airports I was at. And I can tell you there were a lot of really frustrated people, and they weren't assholes, but they were, maybe some of their behavior was asshole-ish. Asshole-ish.
Yeah.
Now, look, we've got some questions that I'm going to come to, but just one little final reflection for me. I was actually on a bus going home the other day. I don't only go to Corrie Lounge. I was on the bus back to my place in Hataitai in Wellington, and it was a Friday night, and 4 Māori wardens hopped on the bus.
Mm.
And we were standing on this puck bus, and I just thought, and I was thinking of you, Selena, and I was thinking both of your Tau Māori ambassador sort of example up in Whangarei and the Manuera businesses. And so I got talking to them. I said, tell me, what's your training like? And I just sort of thought in a funny sort of way, and I've started to see them in downtown Wellington on Courtney Place now. And I just sort of think there's actually
great primary intervention.
Well, and my anxiety as a society, and I'm going to, these are my political views, so not forum views, my views. If we've got an issue of disconnection and anger, adding further force to that situation only worries me that it's not going to actually address maybe the cause. And so what I'm quite liking is seeing Māori wardens out there again, hearing these examples, and I can see there's a combination of this sort of community problem, community response, collaborative solution. And so how can organisations like the Forum and ShopCare and working with others, how can we be maybe oil around helping facilitate some of that collaboration? I think to me it feels good work, but it's how do we keep it focused where there's the control is appropriate. Now I've got some questions here, and then we can go to your. It'd be maybe for you to. I think it'd be quite useful for people to see maybe an end-to-end sense of where you're going. But there's a question here around what frontline staff wear, Selena, around, one of their teams use orange high-vis PPE. Is there anything around colour giving any sort of either triggers or,
Not that I'm aware of, but I will tell you that in Northland, where they had a great response in the bank, the security guard they employed was an ex-cop who knew the community really well, and he did not wear a security guard uniform. He was fairly casual. He had a little bank emblem on his shirt, and they kept it low key. When they knew they might have issues, so they were very engaged in the community. When they knew there might be a bit of a spike because something's happened, then he would put another layer of protective clothing on. But actually, as a security person, he wasn't all kitted out. He only did that occasionally. And so I think that might work in some organisations. It might not work in others. I know in Newmarket, they have got the full kit, those security guys, and I'm not surprised after the stabbing that they experienced last year. But I don't think colours make a difference. I actually think the more engaging you can be. I mean, the idea of maybe ambassadors out in South Auckland, I was chatting to someone the other day, and them having sort of some Samoan flavoured uniform. I just thought that was brilliant. You've got to reflect the communities that you operate in, really. So I don't think high vis necessarily makes a difference. And that's in my opinion. We haven't read anything about it.
No, it's interesting. Across the forums membership, we've got sort of a local council-owned events and venues organisation as part of our mix, and they're wanting to create places where their community can come and enjoy sporting events or concerts or and the idea of them having security basically looking like they've just walked out of a SWAT team, whilst it might be conducive to the protection of the individual and the ability to come down hard, instantly it kind of provides an immediate level of escalation of what the next step is. But to your point, there are certain situations in certain environments where, and there's a subsequent observation here around gang stabbing on a construction site in the lunchroom, which was and the nature of the response to that I'll come back to in a sense. But that's a situation where walking around with a smile on your face might be sort of the road to hell paved with good intentions. So what I'm hearing you say, context and community are really important parts of a consideration of how we might want to turn up in these situations.
Absolutely. And I think, building connections within the communities that you're operating with goes a long way at reducing animosity and violence and aggression, because if you know your community by name, if you are able to interact with the people that walk in your door in a way that works for them, you're going to instantly have a better interaction with those customers.
So this environment, this example, one of the attendees just talked about where the gangs stabbed someone in a lunchroom. Basically, the response they got from the large firm was to just basically not talk to the media, and that was it. So to your point, what that's saying is clearly there were some failures of some primary controls. There was an absence of any secondary control and a total empty, dusty cupboard around tertiary control. So in a way, what I would do is thinking about how we could use that example to relay back within our own environments around saying this was an insightful failure because there were gaps here, and here. Because that can then provide some structure around maybe what we could do positively in the future.
Yeah, but imagine those workers going into work the next day. Do they feel very safe? Nothing's not. Nothing's been done about it. We've got to be acting on these things, and we've got to be learning from the incidences. Otherwise, we're never going to make a difference.
Nice. Now, look, there's another observation here. I don't know if it's the same anonymous attendee, but look, this could be potentially controversial. I'll be interested in your take on it. One of the retail companies they know basically trained their staff in self-defense, which was framed by this individual as a good thing. And I can totally understand why. I can understand that from one perspective, and I can understand it from another. But I'm a former bureaucrat, Selena. So on the one hand and on the other, I'm always going to do that. What's your thought around the role of self-defense for training in a retail environment?
Well, firstly, I think if it makes retail workers have more confidence in how they can de-escalate situations, then it's a good thing. But at the end of the day, violence begets violence. Simple as that. Which is why we have been against some of the recommendations that have come out of the Ministerial Advisory Group. They're looking at arming retailers. I cannot see how that is going to improve outcomes. It'll make some retail workers feel more confident, and it'll put others in harm's way. So I think that we need to really understand that any act of violence, no matter who it's from, is going to in turn create a more violent environment. So I don't think it's a great idea, but if it's something that gives workers confidence in de-escalation, then it's not a bad thing.
Again, what you're what you're weaving into is context, and I always think leadership's context, management's content, and so the content solution might be some self-defense capability.
Yeah.
But if you're not clear on the context and then the reason why that's important, you potentially could find yourself in a situation where you are unintentionally actually escalating the situation, right?
Which is the last thing we want to be doing.
Yeah, to that point, a variation of that, one of the, and for the sake of anonymity, I won't mention the organisation, but basically there was a situation where they had owner operators, and they had assets that they were using that were a target in terms of stealing the thing, the asset, the vehicle. And it was this really interesting. I'd never thought about these words in the sense there were livelihood. This vehicle was about the livelihood. And in the current environment, the livelihood actually puts meat on the table for the family. It keeps me and my family secure. And so I'm willing to take a level of risk with my life to protect my livelihood. And that was creating a situation where they were having a bunch of people being putting themselves in harm's way to defend their livelihood, which I can see from a Maslow's hierarchy perspective, a really understandable response. The company's solution was not to provide them more training on how to defend themselves. It was to underwrite collective insurance and to give those owners of those owner operators assurance that we've got your back. If your vehicle gets nicked, we'll underwrite the insurance.
Yeah, perfect.
And I just think that's a really good example. That in a way sits at a tertiary control because it's happened, but we're saying,
yeah.
So in advance, we'll let you know your livelihood is secure.
Yes.
So look after your life. And I think
don't put your life on the line to protect your livelihood.
And I think if we go back to Safety 101 from a ShopCare and a forum perspective, where we want to change the work, not the worker, not every violence and aggressive risk control needs to be about violence and aggression. That was about how do we remove the need or the pressure, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's what the data, that's why we need the data. We need to understand what the issues are so that we can come up with novel interventions, because just keeping going as we're going is not making a difference at the moment.
Nice. Now look, basically Mike gave us gave I think that the things you were sharing around those community piece are a real double thumbs up. Basically loving this collaboration idea and community problems needing community solutions, which I do nothing but equally applaud. So thanks, Mike. I couldn't agree more. So look, where we are now, I'm just wondering whether you want to take us through the slides quickly to bring us home, and then we'll finish with our final poll. So we got about, so let's say we've got about 5 minutes, Selena, just to take us through where we're at now.
Sure. Okay. Well, if you want to go to the next slide, thank you. This is just an overview of ShopCare. So we look at support a retail workforce of over 230,000 Kiwis. And we provide a range of things. So we provide online training, we do research, we develop guidance, we run ergonomic pilots, and we bring together our own expertise from the team, but also that of our steering groups and advisory group, to focus on what we can do to improve health, safety and wellbeing outcomes for workers in the retail sector and the supply chain. And that supply chain includes manufacturing, it includes transport, logistics and warehousing. So it's significant, but we're lucky to be funded by ACC, because the real driver behind the work that we're doing is reducing injuries for workers and reducing costs for ACC. The thing with VAB, though, it sort of sits alongside that. While we don't have a lot of costs related to violent and aggressive behaviour in ACC, it's the biggest risk retailers are facing. So if we don't address it, we can't talk about the musculoskeletal harm. So that's where this kind of comes in. Thanks. We can go to the next slide. So as I talked about, ShopCare's focus is not retail crime. It is about workplace safety. So we work in those range of groups that are focused on retail crime because they're great interventions that come out of that, and we stay connected in the work that they're doing. But we really want to be looking at how do we improve outcomes for workers that face violent and aggressive behaviour every day. And while our focus is retail and supply chain, I think the VAB that we're doing actually is relevant to anybody that faces this as a risk in the workplace. So the training we've got on our website is for any worker that has to deal with violent or aggressive behaviour. Next slide. So this is what we're trying to look at building. It's a roadmap to improve violent and aggressive behaviour in a national way. So at the moment, we're looking at the sort of first 12 to 18 months. What we are building is a platform to kind of launch this work. And ShopCare won't be doing all the work. What I see us being as a backbone to support the work that's going on and to be able to share the different work that's happening around the place so that we're not doubling our efforts and so that other organisations can learn from those that are doing things really well. We need data. We really do. And so this survey, this frontline worker survey is going to be really important. But working with organisations like Aura is also really important to share what they know. We need to standardise our terminology so that everyone understands what VAB means, and so that when we're reporting on incidents of violent and aggressive behaviour, we get a standardised approach. Because at the moment, every organisation actually reports these things in a different way. So we need a set of reporting metrics that people can all agree on and work towards reporting, so we get that data that we need.
And Selena, that standardised terminology and narrative, would that also include that formalising our sort of VAB risk framework around tertiary, primary, secondary, starting to get good practice examples so that so I can talk turkey to organisations around where you're in your secondary controls so we can share more easily?
Yes, absolutely. So we're all talking about the same stuff, really. That's what's really important. Cool. We want to be finding what's happening out there already that's successful and sharing that, and piloting it. So the ambassador program was one intervention that we discovered. And so we're piling that in other areas to see, okay, can we transfer the wins that they managed to achieve into another location? And if so, well, that means we could do this nationally. But again, it is making sure that people that are running those ambassador programs understand that actually context is so important, and making sure that they are getting to know the communities that they're operating in really well, because that community will determine the type of things that the ambassadors should be looking at. So we're looking at a whole range of initiatives over the next 12 to 18 months. So then we can look and we take the lead as a support function and provide that support function in the platform to deliver on. But we need.
Selena, we've got about a minute and a half, so maybe I'm just thinking maybe if we. So I think
we'll go to the next slide.
And maybe what we might do is put up our final poll at the same time, just while we're rounding up, Selena. So, Kate, you could shut that up. So over to you, Selena.
This is what we've been working on, a range of online learning that's available to everybody. We've been looking at undertaking different research that you can find on our website and developing collateral. And if you go to the next slide, this is what we're going to be looking at delivering over the next 12 to 18 months, which is this roadmap of how we can actually all collaborate to improve outcomes, building guidance, developing our understanding about this critical risk and how we manage it, and piloting different interventions in different locations to showcase what works and what doesn't, but also collaborating on this national customer campaign, which First Union and Woolies were leading. So that's what we've got coming up, essentially. And the next slide is us, really. If you want to stay up to date with the work that we're doing, scan that QR code and join our community. It's all free. And the training that we're developing is free on VAB as well.
Nice. Look, Selena, I guess two big things from me. One, thanks so much for joining me today. I mean, I just think, I really appreciated, I think, the breadth of experience and conversations you're having. So to bring those here, and what I appreciate, hopefully people have found it of use, as sort of a wide-ranging conversation, but also for the work I think you and ShopCare are doing, are trying to grip this up. And for what it's worth, I think the idea of a roadmap to give us a sense of how we can make some progress over the longer term, but get started now, I think is just really sensible. So certainly from a forum perspective for us, it's just wonderful to have a partner in the system willing to sort of take a catalyst and a lead. So we'll be certainly looking to do more from our part. And for those on the call, I'd thoroughly endorse you to have a look at the ShopCare resources. And hopefully when we look to throw that survey out and start to get our arms around this, Selena, you've got friends in the forum.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Francois, for the opportunity to share the work that we're doing and to collaborate, because there's just so much that we can achieve together.
Yeah, lovely. Well, look, we'll leave it there, Selena. Thank you once again. Thank you for those that are on the call. We'll be making some of this available to those that are interested, so just let us know and we will be in touch. Thanks very much.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.